A couple of years ago, ask any Yu-Gi-Oh player to list the quality and even competitive ritual decks in the game, and after the almost immediate response of Necroz, there would be an awkward silence or some hems and haws as some less than up for the task deck may be put forward as another possibility. Well, how times have changed. While no other ritual deck has ever gotten close to the status held by Necroz in its heyday, understandably, there are a number of other reasonably competitive ritual decks that have come up to fill the void. In this deck build today, let's look at a ritual deck that, bolstered by some new support from Raging Tempest, has just recently climbed to the level of competitive: Blackluster Soldier. Starting with the generic direct support for the archetype. While not directly ritual-based, Blackluster Soldier Envoy of the Beginning is definitely a powerhouse with the ability to remove any monster affected by targeted monster effect, or use its blade to remove monsters in addition to inflicting life point damage. With the monster complement of this deck largely comprised of lights and darks, and it being rather easy to get them into the graveyard, Envoy is almost never dead, even on turn 1. Run the one allowable copy. Envoy of the Evening Twilight is kind of the amalgamation of what Twilight does to a ritual summon Blackluster in effect monster form. However, Evening Twilight is rather inconsistent in my taste. Despite the existence of Super Soldier Synthesis, Evening Twilight would still be salvageable if that were the only detriment. However, the loss of the battle phase akin to Soul Charge is deal-breaking. At least for me. This card is just bad because of that restriction, because the deck largely lives and dies on its battle phase. Sacred Soldier is alright, but not useful enough in my opinion to warrant running, because its effect is only one of on its summons, and it does not have enough versatility in hand. Overall, Sacred is just one of those monsters that provides another strategy for running a given deck, a different path to take, but that strategy is so significantly inferior to another strategy, it renders that secondary option somewhat moot. Both Charging and Awakened Gaia are not suitable for this particular build type, one that centers around the use of Super Soldier Synthesis rather than either the original Blackluster Soldier or Super Soldier Ritual, because Super Soldier Synthesis does not actually tribute the monsters involved. However, even before that, neither Gaia was that useful. Usually they were only run as a single copy because their level standing made them clunky both in main deck plays and for extra deck plays. In this build, 0 copies are Charging or Awakened. Envoy of Chaos is one of the newest support cards that operates as a BLS-specific Colute, with a somewhat useful end phase graveyard effect for triggering both Beginning and Twilight's banished effect. However, it seems to me that, based on the number of copies I see in other decks, more people have a higher opinion of Chaos than I do. The overall Colute effect is rather underwhelming in value, similar to running an Honest and a Blue Eyes-centric deck. The Graveyard effect can be somewhat useful for setting up your next play during your next turn, but the setup is a little shaky and really not that valuable. I tend to only run one Envoy of Chaos because it does have its moments, and the overall versatility of Super Soldier Synthesis really helps Envoy of Chaos shine. Beginning Night and Twilight Night are the two archetype-specific catalysts for the deck. When used for a Blackluster Soldier ritual summons, both grant the new ritual monster the ability to banish a single opponent monster, similar to Chaos Sorcerer, while retaining the ability to attack. Beginning grants a second attack, similar to Blackluster Soldier Envoy of the Beginning. Twilight grants the ability to temporarily remove a card from the opponent's hand. Not surprisingly, I prefer Twilight over Beginning, for the resource stripping tends to be more useful than the second attack, largely due to the banish ability. If Beginning granted a different ability, like an Armades-like effect, instead of the banish monster effect, then Beginning might be more useful. The usefulness of the graveyard effect is hampered by neither one having the ability to banish itself, rather they need to be banished by a secondary effect, limiting their value. Overall, I run 2 copies of Twilight and 1 copy of Beginning, for once again, similar to Envoy of Chaos, the versatility of Super Soldier Synthesis mitigates a lot of the detriment associated with only running the limited copies of both Beginning and Twilight. You did not need to max them out at 3 like you did before Synthesis came out if you really wanted to maximize the effectiveness of their effects. Also, one of the reasons I run one copy of Beginning over multiples is when you elect to initiate the double attacking attribute of Beginning in a ritual summons, the duel really should end before the opponent gets another turn, so I feel one Beginning is enough. Between the two Blackluster ritual monsters, the original Blackluster gained some level of popularity after the release of Pre-Preparation of Rites, because it actually worked with Rites outside of Super Soldier, significantly increasing the speed of the deck. However, with the release of Super Soldier Synthesis, in my opinion, the momentum pendulum, so to speak, has swung back towards Super Soldier because it actually does something rather than simply act as a 3000 attack beatstick, relying on Beginning and Twilight attributes for effect application. Super Soldier will inflict 3000 total damage via its battle and effect damage when destroying a monster when opponent attack augmentation is not involved on that monster. Without any Gaias in this deck, the secondary effect is not applicable. The interesting thing about my build is I actually only run 2 copies of Super Soldier because, once again, Super Soldier Synthesis' ability to summon Super Soldier from the graveyard allows you to get away with only running 2 copies, because in my experience, you do not want to draw Super Soldier. You want to search for it via one of the various methods of searching you have available for you. When you draw Super Soldier, at least for me, it almost has a sense of, I just wasted that draw, because there's so much searching in this deck for Super Soldier. Running 2 copies of Super Soldier can be a little dicey in a sense, because if you get both in your hand, your gateways become dead. But overall, in my experience, dead gateways have not been that detrimental, and their occurrence is too seldom to really be that important. Super Soldier Soul is just a bad card for the deck in its current state. There is not enough advantage to taking the Blackluster Soldier name, and the level 1 standing does not help unless you're also running the Gaias. This card is dead in hand a lot of the time, and the search effect via banishing it from the graveyard is not overly useful. Yes, with Synthesis, there is combo potential of discarding a Blackluster ritual and then using Synthesis, but that is at least a 4-card combo and is not very consistent. If in the future the deck expands the cards that interact with monsters with Blackluster in their names, then maybe this card becomes useful, but now it's rather inefficient. Jumping the gun a little here, let's not talk about Chaos form for this deck, and we will all be better for it. I have never really been a fan of Super Soldier Ritual because of the exact level 8 requirement, and while its graveyard effect can be useful, the general brickiness of running enough Blacklusters to take advantage of the effect heavily limits the overall usefulness. The 1-turn delay also hurts the effect significantly for this type of deck, which definitely leans OTK. While running 1 copy is certainly a possibility, I prefer 3 copies of the next card. Overall, this deck was generally bad, no matter how much people tried to dress it up or any fawning over cherry-picked replays tried to demonstrate, until Super Soldier Synthesis came along. Synthesis is a fantastic card for this deck in multiple ways. First, the ability to ritual summon from the graveyard instead of just from the hand provides incredible versatility, which can only get better if even more BLS rituals are ever released, although I would not hold my breath. This effect also allows for increased flexibility with regards to dumping BLS rituals to the graveyard for various effect costs to increase the utility of those effects. Second, Synthesis acts as a quasi-foolish burial, not only increasing resource efficiency because only 1 card would be required from the hand instead of a possible 2, but also helps increase playmaking with that graveyard dump. 3 copies should be run in all BLS ritual decks, in my opinion. Gateway of Chaos is definitely a useful card for the deck, netting either a Blackluster Ritual Monster Search or a Gaia the Fierce Knight Monster Search when activated. Note that this search is mandatory, so if a search target does not exist in your deck, you can't activate Gateway at all. Also, it will frequently net a ritual spell. Note this is any ritual spell, not just BLS specific, soon after, either on the same turn or on the next turn. One of the nice things about Gateway is it takes pressure off a generic ritual searcher like Manju. One of the sad things, though, about this archetype is it doesn't really have any good way, archetype specifically, to utilize the spell counters that Gateway accumulates, other than for Gateway's effect itself, and you run out of ritual spells through this effect rather quickly. Too bad. this could be an interesting area for future card development. I feel Gateway to Chaos is in that in-between area of, do I run 3 copies of the field spell, or do I run 2 copies of the field spell and 1 Terraforming? I choose the latter in this situation, 2 copies of Gateway of Chaos. Beginning of Heaven and Earth first suffers from the common lament in the player community of, why is this a trap instead of a spell? Right now, Heaven is one of those unfulfilled potential cards in my eyes, for it does not provide nearly enough advantage to be worth running at the given time. There are not enough quality or enough versatility of light and dark warriors in the game, especially for the way this deck operates. Therefore, when you have to choose between light and dark monsters in general for synthesis, or warriors for this card, as a matter of deck space, the former wins every time in my book. Synthesis always should get the priority. Heaven certainly would have been better if Beginning or Twilight could banish themselves, but they cannot. Overall, Heaven just requires too many moving parts for too little benefit to be worth running at the current time. Basically, it's just a dead draw too often. Super Soldier Rebirth is too awkward and slow to be a good defensive card, and it really is not needed to help this deck OTK. It's just an all-around mediocre card at best, 0 copies. I like the fact that Super Soldier Shield attempted to take advantage of the spell counter well provided by Gateway, but unfortunately its effect is more suited for a control deck, which I believe that BLS really cannot be right at this moment, especially without any level 4 or lower main deck monsters that have BLS in their names. 0 copies. For the other monsters, I run the not surprising 3 copies of Manju of the 10,000 Hands. For most of the other monsters, I try to take advantage of the Foolish Burial aspect of Super Soldier Synthesis. Therefore, there needs to be a group of light and dark monsters for the deck that have a summed level of 8. While there are some nice level 3 dark monsters, most notably the Djinns and the Burning Abyss, that can work well with level 5 Cyber Dragons. Not surprisingly, I feel that a pair of level 4s seems to be the most versatile level agreement and work the best in my experience. With that said, for the light side, I run 2 copies of Performage Trick Clown, 2 copies of Photon Thrasher, and 1 copy of Electromagnetic Turtle to complement the 3 copies of Manju and the 1 copy of Beginning. Trick Clown significantly increases the rank 4 XZ playmaking due to the effect of Synthesis sending it to the graveyard from the deck, allowing either Gaga Samurai or Castel to aid BLS. Photon Thrasher can be special summoned from your hand when you control no monsters to also help your rank 4 XZ plays and help you get an extra deck complement to your BLS. And the 1 Electromagnetic Turtle provides some quality defense, especially when you have to go first with this deck. For the dark side, I run 1 copy of Shaddoll Dragon, 1 copy of Holding Legs, and 2 copies of Juragedo. Juragedo provides quality playmaking from its special summoning capacity, attack augmentation, and life point gain. Holding Legs is a quasi-giant Trunade, clearing the way for BLS to do its thing, and can temporarily lock back row when in the graveyard. And Dragon is used to take out those pesky strikes, will interfere with BLS effect activation born from Beginning or Twilight use, and can be a decent defensive choice. While one can run either 2 Dragon or 2 Holding Leg, they do serve different minor roles towards the same general goal, and 1 each provides nice versatility for me. Closing out the monsters, I run 2 copies of Plaguespreader Zombie to add a Synchro component to the deck to take some pressure off of the ritual element, and 1 copy of Lightpulsar Dragon. Plaguespreader significantly increases the OTK probability of this deck, especially with regards to allowing a same-turn ritual spell search from Gateway due to the additional monsters going from the field to the graveyard for the Synchro summons. Lightpulsar Dragon helps trigger Beginning and Twilight's banish effects, increasing efficiency in addition to putting a 2500 attack point monster on the field, and can work nicely in combination with Synthesis and Plaguespreader. Also, depending on how one builds the extra deck, the level 5 or higher Dark Dragon summons effect can also be accessed. For the remaining spells, I run 1 copy of Raigeki, 3 copies of Instant Fusion for Synchro and XZ playmaking, 2 copies of Trade-In for speed, for recall that the ability of Super Soldier Synthesis to summon from the graveyard makes BLS dumping for Trade-In valid, 1 copy of Upstart Goblin. In my eyes, the extra 1000 life point gain for your opponent does not conflict enough with OTK probability to run a third Trade-In or something else for the increased consistency that Upstart Goblin provides, and 3 copies of Twin Twister, because, as mentioned earlier, those Solemn Strikes can really screw with this deck, and there are plenty of monsters in the main deck that benefit from the discard. Also, to aid gateway acquisition, I run the aforementioned 1 copy of Terraforming. Finally, while Synthesis may act as a quasi-foolish burial, it is important to run the real McCoy, in my opinion. 1 copy of Foolish Burial, and 1 copy of Reinforcement of the Army to search for Thrasher, Beginning, or Twilight. For the extra deck, I run 1 copy of Elder Entity Norden, 1 Kamionwizard, 1 Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, 1 PSY-Framelord Omega, 1 Void Ogre Dragon or Stardust Dragon, depending on the type of defense you want to play, 1 Coral Dragon, 1 Stardust Charge Warrior, 1 copy of Blackwing Nothung, 2 Castel the Skyblaster Musketeer, 1 number 106 Giant Hand. I feel this is a nice solid defensive choice when going first. 1 Diamond Dire Wolf, 1 Gagaga Samurai, 1 Abyss Dweller, and 1 Evil Swarm Nightmare or 1 Anti-Luminescent Knight, again depending on the type of defense you want to play. In the end, Yugi's so-called third-tier deck can actually throw down rather effectively in a competitive environment when designed properly to maximize the possible advantages that can be gained from Synthesis and the associated ritual. The one thing, obviously, that holds this deck back is that, unlike the top-tier decks, it does not have the cards to find that effective balance between speed, power, and efficiency. Basically, it is just not as consistent as top-tier decks. However, with regards to the brass tacks question of competitiveness, this deck is definitely competitive. You can go into any match against any other deck and still have a reasonable chance to win. Well, that is my BLS deck. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.